Chapter 6. Mina Murray's Journal. 24 July, Whitby. Lucy met me at the station looking sweeter and lovelier than ever, and we drove up to the house at the Crescent in which they have rooms. This is a lovely place. The little river, the Esk, runs through a deep valley which broadens out as it comes near the harbor. A great viaduct runs across, with high piers, through which the view seems somehow further away than it really is. The valley is beautifully green, and it is so steep that when you are on the high land on the either side, you look right across it, unless you're near enough to see down. The houses of the old town, the side away from us, are all red-roofed and seem piled up over one another anyhow, like the pictures we see of Nuremberg. Right over the town is the ruin of Whitby Abbey, which was sacked by the Danes and which is the scene of part of Miramon, where the girl was built up in the wall. It is a most noble ruin, of immense size, and full of beautiful and romantic bits. There is a legend that a white lady is seen in one of the windows. Between it and the town there is another church, the parish one, round which is a big graveyard, all full of tombstones. This is, to my mind, the nicest spot in Whitby, for it lies right over the town and has a full view of the harbor and all up to the bay, where the headland called the Kettleness stretches out to the sea. It descends so steeply over the harbor that part of the bank has fallen away, and some of the graves have been destroyed. In one place, part of the stonework of the graves stretches out over the sandy pathway far below. There are walks with seats beside them through the churchyard, and people go and sit there all day long, looking at the beautiful view and enjoying the breeze. I shall come and sit here very often myself and work. Indeed, I am writing now with my book on my knee and listening to the talk of 3 old men who are sitting beside me. They seem to do nothing all day but sit up here and talk. The harbor lies below me with, on the far side, one long granite wall stretching out to the sea with a curve outward at the end of it, in the middle of which is a lighthouse. A heavy seawall runs along outside of it. On the near side, the seawall makes an elbow, crooked inversely, and its end, too, has a lighthouse. Between the 2 piers there is a narrow opening into the harbor, which then suddenly widens. It is nice at high tide, but when the tide is out, the shoals away to nothing, and there is merely a stream of the Esk, running between banks of sand, with rocks here and there. Outside the harbor, on this side, there rises for about half a mile a great reef, the sharp edge of which runs straight out from behind the south lighthouse. At the end of it is a buoy with a bell, which swings in bad weather and sends in a mournful sound on the wind. They have a legend here that when a ship is lost, bells are heard out at sea. I must ask the old man about this. He is coming this way. He's a funny old man. He must be awfully old, for his face is all gnarled and twisted like the bark of a tree. He tells me that he is nearly 100, and that he was a sailor in the Greenland fishing fleet when Waterloo was fought. He is, I'm afraid, a very skeptical person, for when I asked him about the bells at sea and the white lady at the Abbey, he said very brusquely, "I wouldn't fash mysel' about them, miss. Them things that be all wore out. Mind, I don't say that they never was, but I do say they wasn't in my time. They be all very well for cummers and trippers and the like, but not for a nice young lady like you. Them feet folks from York and Leeds always be eating cured herrings and drinking tea and looking out to buy cheap jet would creed aught. I wonder mysel' who would be bothered telling lies to them. Even the newspapers, which is full of fool talk. I thought he would be a good person to learn interesting things from, so I asked him if he would mind telling me something about the whale fishing in the old days. He was just settling himself to begin when the clock struck 6, whereupon he labored to get up and said, "I must gang againwards home now, miss. My granddaughter doesn't like me to be kept waiting when the tea is ready, for it takes me time to crammel a boon at these greers, for there be a many of 'em, miss. I lack belly timber sairly by the clock." He hobbled away, and I could see him hurrying, as well as he could, down the steps. The steps are a great feature of the place. They lead up from the town to the church. There are hundreds of them, I do not know how many, and they wind up in a delicate curve. The slope is so gentle that a horse could easily walk up and down them. I think they must originally have had something to do with the Abbey. I shall go home too. Lucy went out visiting with her mother, and they were only duty calls. I did not go. They will be home by this. 1 August. I came up here an hour ago with Lucy, and we had a most interesting talk with my old friend and the 2 others who always come and join him. He is evidently the Sir Oracle of them, and I should think must have been in his time a most dictatorial person. He will not admit anything, and downfaces everybody. If he can't out-argue them, he bullies them, and then takes their silence for agreement with his views. Lucy was looking sweetly pretty in her white lawn frock. She's got beautiful color since she has been here. I noticed that the old men did not lose any time in coming up and sitting near her when we sat down. She is so sweet with old people. I think they all fell in love with her on the spot. Even my old man succumbed and did not contradict her, but gave me double share instead. I got him on the subject of legends, and he went off at once into a sort of sermon. I must try to remember it and put it down. It be all fool talk, lock, stock, and barrel, that's what it be, and naught else. These banes and wafts and bugos and the bargas and bugles, all of them ain't meant them as fit is set to the barren and dizzy women of Belden. They be naught but air blebs. They and all grims and signs and warnings be all invented by parsons and ilbooks, brisk bodies, and railway tooters, to skeet and scunner halflins, and to get folks to do something that they wouldn't do, that they don't other inclined to. It makes me ireful to think of them. Why, it's them that, not content with printing lies on the papers and preaching them out of the pulpits, does want to be cutting them on the tombstones. Look here all around you, and what ert ye will, all them sterns holding up their heads as well as they can to get out of their pride as they can't, simply tumbling down with the weight of the lies wrote on them. Here lies the body, or sacred to the memory, wrote on all of them, and yet in nigh half of them there ain't been no bodies at all, and the memories of them bain't cared for a pinch of snuff about, much less sacred. Lies all of them, nothing but lies, of one kind or another. My gog, but it will be a queer scowderdent at the day of judgment, when they come tumbling up here in their death starks, all drooped together and trying to drag their tombstones with them, to prove how good they was, some of them trimmelin' and ditherin' with their hands that dozened and slippery from lying in the sea, they can't even keep their group o' them. I could see from the old fellow's self-satisfied air, and the way in which he looked round for the approval of his cronies, that he was showing off, so I put in a word to keep him going. "Oh, Mr. Swales, you can't be serious. Surely these tombstones are not all wrong." "Yoblins, there may be a poorish few not wrong, savin' where they make the people too good, for there be folk that do think a balm bowl be like the sea, if it only be their own. The whole thing only be lies. Now look you here, you come here a stranger, and you get this Kirkgarth." I nodded, for I thought it better to assent, though I did not quite understand his dialect. I knew it had something to do with the church. He went on, "And you can't say all these steens and a bun fook and been happen to your snood and snog?" I assented again. Then that just be where the lie comes in. Why, there be scores of these lay-beds between in the old Dunn's bacca-box on Friday night. He nudged one of his companions, and they all laughed. And my gog, how could they be otherwise? Look at that one. The aftest a bat in the beer bank. Read it. I went over and read. Edward Spenslaw, master mariner, murdered by pirates off the coast of Andes, April 1854, aged 30. When I came back, Mr. Swales went on. "Who brought him home, I wonder, to hap him here? Murdered off the coast of Andes, and you conceited his body lay under? Why, I could name you a dozen whose bones lay in the Greenland sea above." He pointed northwards. "Or where the currents may have drifted them. There be stins about ye. Ye can with your young eyes read the small print of lies from here. This Baithraght Lowry, I knew his father, lost in the livery off Greenland in 20, or Andrew Woodhouse, drowned in the same seas in 1777, or John Paxton, drowned off Cape Farewell a year later, or old John Rawlings, whose grandfather sailed with me, drowned in the Gulf of Finland in 50. Do you think all these men would have to make a rush to Whitby when the trumpet sounds? I have me another aboot it. I tell ye that when ye got here, they be jommelin' and jostlin' one another in that way. It'd be like to fight up on the ice in the old days. We'd be at one another from daylight to dark, and trying to tie up our cuts by the light of the aurora borealis." This was evidently local pleasantry, for the old man cackled over it, and his cronies joined in with gusto. "But," I said, "surely you are not quite correct, for you start on the assumption that all the poor people, or their spirits, will have to take their tombstones with them on the day of judgment. Do you think that will really be necessary?" "Well, what else they be tombstones for? Answer me that, miss." "To please their relatives, I suppose." please their relatives, you suppose." This he said with intense scorn. "I will pleasure their relatives to know what lies is wrote over them, and everybody in the place know that they be lies." He pointed to a stone at our feet, which had been laid down as a slab, on which the seat rested, close to the edge of the cliff. "Read the lines on that there stern," he said. The letters were upside down to me from where I sat, but Lucy was more opposite to them, so she leant over and read. "Sacred to the memory of George Cannon, who died in the hopes of a glorious resurrection on July 29th, 1873, falling from the rocks at Kettleness. This tomb is erected by his sorrowing mother to her dearly beloved son. He was the only son of his mother, and she was a widow." "Really, Mr. Swales, I don't see anything very funny in that." She spoke her comment very gravely and somewhat severely. "You don't see aught funny, but that's because you don't go on. The sorrowing mother was a hellcat that hated him because he was a crooks, a regular lamateur he was, and he hated her so that he committed suicide in order that she mightn't get the insurance she put on his life. He blew nigh the top off his head with the old musket they had for scaring the crows with. 'Twarn't for crows then, for it brought the dogs and dwops to him. That's the way he fell off the rocks. And as to hopes of glorious resurrection, I've often heard him say myself that he hoped he'd go to hell, for his mother was so pious that she'd be sure to go to heaven, and he didn't want to addle where she was. Now isn't that a stern at any rate?" He hammered it with his stick as he spoke. "A pack of lies, and won't it make Gabriel keckle when the Gordy comes panting up there with the geese of the tombstone balanced on his ump, and ask it to be took as evidence?" I did not know what to say, but Lucy turned the conversation, as she said, rising up, "Oh, why did you tell us of this? This is my favorite seat, and I cannot leave it. And now I find I must go on sitting over the grave of a suicide." "That won't harm you, my pretty, and it may make poor Gordy gladsome to have so trim a lass sitting on his lap. It won't hurt ye. Why, I've sat here off and on nigh for 20 years past, and it ain't done me no harm. Don't you fash about them as lies under ye, or that doesn't lie there either. It'll be time for you to be getting scant when you see the tombstones all run away with, and the place as bare as stubble field. There's a clock. I must be going. My service to you, ladies." And he hobbled off. Lucy and I sat for a while, and it was all so beautiful before us that we took hands as we sat, and she told me all over again about Arthur and their coming marriage. That made me just a little heartsick, for I haven't heard from Jonathan for a whole month. The same day. "I came up here alone, for I am very sad. There is no letter for me. I hope there cannot be anything the matter with Jonathan. The clock has just struck 9. I see the lights scattered all over the town, sometimes in rows where the streets are, and sometimes singly they run right up the Esk and die away in the curve of the valley. To my left the view is cut off by a black line of roofs of the old house next to the abbey. The sheep and lambs are bleating in the fields away behind me, and there's a clatter of a donkey's hoof up the paved road below. The band on the pier is playing a harsh waltz in good time, and further along the quay there's the Salvation Army meeting in the back street. Neither of the bands hears the other, but up here I hear and see them both. I wonder where Jonathan is, and if he is thinking of me. I wish he were here.